The first step to using jQuery is to obtain the latest version of the code and then to add it to your web pages. Keep in mind that jQuery is just JavaScript. It can't do anything that JavaScript can't do, and it needs to be included in the pages in the same exact way. The most common method of acquiring the jQuery library is just to download it. The most current version is always available from the jQuery website. If you visit jQuery.com, you can download the latest version of the library. Currently on the jQuery website, once I get to the home page, there's a big orange button right here that prompts me to download jQuery. If I click this link right here, it's going to take me to the section of jQuery's website where I can obtain the code. Currently, there's a few different versions of jQuery available. In addition to offering both compressed and uncompressed versions, which we'll talk about in just a moment, you have two choices. You have the jQuery 1x line, and then you have the 2x line. The current 1x line is version 1.11.1. I'm going to download this version to incorporate into a project. If I click on this link, it'll go ahead and download a version from my browser. And I'll just open it in another tab so you can see what it is. The file is simply a JavaScript file. It's not pretty, it's not going to be very readable, it's long and complex, and luckily it's something that you don't really need to worry about. All you need to do is save it into your root directory. I generally like to put it in a sites folder beneath my site document root, and then I just need to tell my HTML to include the jQuery library. This is done by adding a script tag to the head section of the HTML document. And here's an example of what it might look like. You can see I have two script tags right here. The first one is going to add in my locally saved version of the jQuery library. The second script tag is my own personal script file where we'll actually run our own jQuery code. This can be placed in an external JavaScript file, or you can embed it right there on the web page. Which solution you choose is going to depend on whether you're just building one page or whether you have a whole website, which is going to be dependent on the jQuery that you want to incorporate into your project. The other option that you have on jQuery's website is to download the uncompressed version of the jQuery library. The uncompressed version is not quite as scary as the compressed version. It has line breaks, it has comments, it has all sorts of things that make the version much more readable than the uncompressed version. This is a great solution if you want to find out more about how jQuery was actually created. It also allows you to be able to make edits to it if you want to do so. However, this file is substantially larger than the compressed version of the library. Currently, the uncompressed version is about 287K and the compressed version is about 98K. So whenever you are rolling this out for production, you always want to be linking to the compressed version of the code since it will load quicker. An alternative method for including the jQuery library that's worth considering is to use a content delivery network, or CDN. A CDN is just a network of computers that are specifically designed to serve content to users in a fast and scalable manner. These servers are often distributed geographically, with each request being served by the nearest server in the network. Google hosts several popular open source libraries on their CDN, including jQuery and the jQuery UI, which we'll look at later on in this course. So instead of hosting the jQuery files on your own web server, as I just showed you in the first example, we have the option of letting Google pick up part of the bandwidth bill. You benefit from the speed and reliability of Google's vast infrastructure, and with the added bonus that there's a good chance that your users might have visited a site already that uses jQuery and have cached the jQuery library. In order to link to a CDN version of jQuery, you would place in the source attribute the absolute URL for the path to the jQuery library. And let me show you how you can find that. If you visit developers.google.com/speed/libraries/dev guide, or you could just Google Google hosted jQuery and it'll take you here, you can see a list of all of the hosted libraries that Google currently has available to any user. We'll be using jQuery, so I'm going to click on that, and when I do so, I have a absolute path to that particular version of jQuery. It is worth noting that when you use the Google hosted version of jQuery, the URL does not include the HTTP protocol. Without the HTTP:/protocol, this will not work on locally run versions of your project. So you'll want to make sure that you add HTTP: to the beginning part of the address. And they have all different versions of jQuery. Sometimes in a project you might not be able to use the most current version because it might not be compatible with something that you want to do. So if you click on versions, you can see that you are able to go back to any version that you might need. Many of the examples in this part of our course are going to be done using the 1.5.1 version. If you simply change the version number in the path, you can have access to any of these older versions of the library. Once again, when you're linking to the CDN, that is just the link for the jQuery library. You'll also need to incorporate a link to your personal version of the script so that you can include any scripts that you might be using. There are other CDNs that host jQuery, but Google is certainly one of the most reliable ones. Other options available to you are using what jQuery currently calls the jQuery pre-release builds. These are also referred to as the nightlies or subversions. These nightlies are automated builds of the jQuery library that include all the new code that might be added or modified during the course of the day. These latest development versions are available to download and to use in the same manner as the regular library. It is noted, however, that you probably don't want to use these unless you are testing or wanting to be involved with the development, since these versions often contain bugs and are subject to frequent changes. So unless you're looking to work on the jQuery library itself, it's probably best to skip these options. You also have the jQuery 2x version, and these versions are versions that are not compatible with Internet Explorer 6, 7, or 8. So if you know that your project does not need to support these older versions of IE, then you could go ahead and get the 2x version. As I mentioned, for most of the projects in this course, we'll just be using the 1x versions for what we are going to do here. And I definitely would encourage you to get the compressed version or the minified version because all of the code is compressed, the line breaks and spaces have been removed, and variable names are shortened. It is the exact same jQuery library, but it's much smaller than the original, so it's great for you to reduce bandwidth and speed up your page requests for the end user. Now that we've included jQuery into our web page, let's have a look at what it can do. The jQuery syntax may look a little odd the first time you see it, but it's really quite straightforward, and best of all, it's highly consistent. After writing your first few commands, the style and syntax will be stuck in your head and will leave you wanting to write more. Including jQuery in your page gives you access to a single magical function called, strangely enough, jQuery. Just one function? Well, it's through this one function that jQuery exposes hundreds of powerful tools to help add another dimension to your web page. This one single function acts as a gateway to the entire jQuery library. There's little chance of library function names conflicting with other libraries or with your own JavaScript code. We say that the jQuery library is contained in the jQuery namespace. Namespacing is an excellent approach for playing nicely with other code on the page. But if we're going to use a lot of jQuery, which we are, it'll quickly become annoying to have to type the full jQuery function name for every single command that we use. To combat this issue, jQuery provides a shorter alias for accessing the library. And simply put, that's just the $sign. The $sign is a short, valid JavaScript variable name. And since we are going to often be accessing the jQuery library, using the alias is going to make our code much more readable and maintainable. Let's dissect a jQuery statement. The jQuery command begins with a call to the jQuery function, or its alias. This is just an example of the same jQuery statement using the full function name in the first example and the alias in the second example. Each command is made up of 4 parts: the jQuery function or its alias, its selectors, in this case we're using the paragraph, its action, and the parameters. We already know about the jQuery function. Let's look at each of the other elements in turns. First, we use a selector to select one or more elements on the page. Next, we choose which action is to be applied to each element we've selected. We'll see more actions as we implement effects throughout this course. And finally, we specify some sort of parameter to tell jQuery exactly how we want to apply the chosen action. Whenever you see a jQuery code, try to break it up into these component parts. It'll make it a lot easier for you to comprehend when you're just starting out. So right here, we've asked the selector to select all paragraph tags on the page, and we've chosen jQuery's CSS action, which is used to modify a CSS property of the paragraph elements that were initially selected. And finally, we've set on some parameters to set the CSS color property and then the value to blue. So this would result in all paragraphs turning blue. Here we passed on 2 parameters, color and blue, into the CSS action, but the number of parameters passed into an action can vary. Some require 0 parameters, some accept multiple sets of parameters for changing a whole bunch of properties at once, and some require that we specify another JavaScript function for running code when an event, like an element being clicked, for example, happens. But all the commands follow this basic anatomy. jQuery has been designed to integrate seamlessly with HTML and CSS. As you know, the DOM is a standard way of representing objects in HTML that all browser makers agree to follow. A good working knowledge of the DOM will ensure a smooth transition into jQuery. The DOM is what you call bits of rendered HTML. It's a hierarchical representation of your HTML markup, where each element, such as a div or a p tag, has a parent. Its container can also have one or more nested child elements. Each element can have an ID, or it can have one or more class attributes, which generally you assign in your HTML source file. When the browser reads an HTML page and constructs the DOM, it displays it as a web page comprising objects that can either sit there looking pretty as a static page, or more interestingly, be manipulated by our code. In this sample DOM fragment, you can see that our body tag has 3 child elements, an h1 and 2 paragraph tags. These 2 elements, by virtue of being contained in the same parent element, are referred to as siblings. Here I have a div that has been assigned an ID of footer. It uses an ID because it's unique. There should only be one instance of these on the page. The DOM lets us assign the same names to multiple page elements via the class attribute. This is usually done on elements that share characteristics, such as this example here, where I have both a paragraph and a span tag that have the class of error assigned to them. When you write CSS, you can hook elements by ID with a hash symbol or with class by a period symbol. These CSS rules will give us a black border to the element with an ID of footer and make all the elements with a class of error have red text. So as you can see, when it comes time to write some jQuery, you'll find that knowing about CSS selectors and the DOM is very important. jQuery uses the same syntax as CSS for selecting elements on the page and manipulating it. So once you've mastered selecting, then the rest of it just falls into place, thanks to jQuery.